Earlier this month, US politicians dropped a bombshell report revealing how the EU has not only been censoring speech in Europe, but actively interfering in European elections, allegedly. EU politicians have denied the allegations, but US politicians have the receipts. Internal documents from the largest social media companies proving that the EU pressured them to suppress certain opinions. Not only that, but these internal documents reveal that EU politicians traveled to the US in 2024 to discuss US election preparation, suggesting that the EU also tried to interfere in the 2024 election in the US. And that's why today we're going to summarize this report, explain where all this censorship is coming from, and look at how it could continue even if governments back off. Spoiler, some private companies are on board. My name is Nick, and you're watching Coin Bureau Finance. Let's start with why so many governments and some companies are increasingly pushing for online censorship, because it's something that's critically important to understand. In short, trust in institutions has been declining globally for years, particularly in the West. The result is that there's been rising opposition, both internationally and domestically, to the current world order, which is sustained by these institutions. And this begs the question of why trust in institutions has been declining. And the short answer is because of the free exchange of information, which has made it easier for that average person to see what these institutions are doing, including what they're doing wrong and how they're pretending it's all fine. A perfect example of this is the pandemic lockdowns and the sharp treatments that were mandated. Subsequent studies on the effectiveness of lockdowns found no statistically significant differences in mortality rates between countries that locked down and those that didn't. Similarly, claims that the mandated sharp treatments prevented infection and transmission quickly turned out to be false. Of course, this destroyed public trust in institutions related to health, both domestically and internationally. Make no mistake, this decline in public trust is a big problem, especially as it relates to health. The bigger problem, though, is arguably that these institutions, and the individuals that run them, have refused to acknowledge their mistakes and have either gone on acting as if nothing has happened, or actively denying that anything happened at all. Obviously, this has only served to further destroy public trust in these institutions. A paragraph from the recent report by US politicians summarizes the situation perfectly. Quote, "The internet and social media initially promised to be a force that would democratize speech, and with it political power. This development threatened the established political order, and by the mid-2010s, the political establishments in the United States and Europe sought to counter rising populist movements that questioned deeply unpopular policies such as mass migration. In other words, free speech, once a core value of Western democracies, has become a threat to these Western democracies because it has exposed the corruption of many Western institutions. Rather than acknowledge this corruption and fix their mistakes to regain public trust, some Western institutions have started trying to censor all criticism and opposition, and it seems the European Union is one of them. But before we get into that, you should check out our free weekly newsletter and check out some of the finance-related deals that we have for our loyal viewers. Just click the link in the description and scan the QR code on your screen. You don't want to miss what we have to offer. Back to the video. Now, this ties into the recent report from those US politicians, which comes from the House Judiciary Committee and is titled, quote, "The Foreign Censorship Threat, Part 2, Europe's Decade-Long Campaign to Censor the Global Internet and How It Harms American Speech in the United States." We'll leave a link to the full report in the description, as well as the X thread that summarizes its key findings. But first, a bit of background. This report and the investigation behind it have their roots in a letter by European Commissioner Thierry Breton sent to Elon Musk in August 2024, opposing Musk's plan to do an interview with Trump on X and threatening regulatory action based on the Digital Services Act, or DSA, which we'll come back to in a bit. As you know, Trump won the 2024 election, and this gave the Republicans enough political power to do a proper investigation into the motivations behind Breton's threats against X. Naturally, it was assumed that the motivation was to censor the interview to reduce Trump's chances of winning the 2024 election. But Republicans didn't have any proof, just circumstantial evidence from Breton resigning in September 2024 after the controversy. And that's why in February 2025, House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan issued an order requiring 8 of the largest tech platforms and social media companies to provide documents related to their discussions with foreign governments about anything related to online censorship. And these documents provide the basis of the report released earlier this month, but you'd have noticed this report was Part 2, not Part 1. Part 1 of the report was published in July 2025, and it contained preliminary findings, and it was published in a response to a closed-door workshop the EU had held with social media companies in May 2025 about compliance with the DSA. This closed-door workshop provided hypothetical scenarios of speech that should be censored under the DSA, such as opposition to illegal immigration and memes. Yes, memes. Part 1 also included a detailed explanation of the DSA and its problematic provisions, which include the creation of a so-called digital services coordinators in every European country, which work with so-called trusted flaggers to remove information that is not illegal but would constitute, quote, hate speech or, quote, disinformation. Put differently, ministries of truth coordinating with NGOs to censor legal speech. What's crazy is that the DSA also allows the EU to manipulate algorithms in case of a present or potential emergency, which could be literally anything. And if that wasn't crazy enough, Part 1 of the report revealed that, quote, if extraordinary circumstances lead to a serious threat to public security or public health in the Union, regulators are even empowered to temporarily shut down platforms within the EU. Now, Part 1 of the report speculated on the possibility that the EU's push for censorship began around the time that Donald Trump won the 2016 election. Documents provided to the House Judiciary Committee have since confirmed that the EU's online censorship efforts began in 2015 with the EU Internet Forum, which provided guidelines on what kinds of speech social media platforms should police. And these include populist rhetoric, anti-government, anti-EU content, anti-elite content, political satire, and, yes, quote, meme subculture. Part 2 of the report revealed that by 2018, the EU was actively calling on social media platforms to, quote, dilute the visibility of these kinds of posts until the EU could put together comprehensive censorship regulations, which eventually came in the form of the DSA in 2022. And by the way, guys, if you're enjoying this video so far, then be sure to smash that like button to boost us in the algorithm and subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Now, by this point, you're probably wondering why you should even care. I mean, particularly if you live in America. And there are 3 reasons. The first is that the House Judiciary Committee alleges that the EU's censorship activities have been infringing on the First Amendment rights of Americans. Now, this is in part because the application could be global, and in part because there is evidence of US election interference by the EU. Consider the following paragraph from Part 2 of the report. Quote, in May 2024, European Commission Vice President Jourova traveled to California to meet with major tech platforms. During this trip, Jourova met with TikTok CEO Shao Chu and TikTok's head of safety and trust to discuss topics including election preparedness. TikTok sought confirmation on whether the European Commission Vice President was traveling all the way to California to have a meeting that stayed mostly within the EU, or whether she wanted to discuss both EU and US election preparedness. The European Commission confirmed that Vice President Jourova wanted to discuss both. End quote. To bring you up to speed, Jourova played a key role in shaping the DSA and has a history of being opposed to election results in Europe that are contrary to the EU's interests. The most infamous example here was in 2020, when Jourova called Hungary a, quote, ill democracy. And we'll come back to how the EU has allegedly interfered in European elections in a moment. But first, you need to know something else. Politicians in the EU and elsewhere, as well as institutions such as the World Economic Forum, have praised the DSA and have publicly proclaimed that they hope it will be the standard for regulating speech online globally. That's the second reason why you should care. Similar regulations are being planned around the world, and some of them have already gone into force in countries like the UK. And the third reason is because of the geopolitical implications this could all have. As I mentioned in the introduction, EU politicians have denied all the allegations in both Part 1 and Part 2 of the House Judiciary reports. But again, there are receipts for virtually everything these reports allege, and so far, they suggest that the EU's online censorship efforts aren't one-offs here and there. They are systemic. And if that is in fact the case, then it sets the stage for potential retaliation by the US against the EU. Case in point, French President Emmanuel Macron recently warned that plans to put age verification on social media could result in US retaliation. Newsflash, that's because all these age verifications on social media are part of the online censorship regulations being rolled out globally, but we'll come back to that in a bit. First, you need to understand just how impactful these online censorship regulations can be. And Part 2 of the House Judiciary report found evidence that the EU interfered in at least 8 elections in 6 countries by asking social media platforms to police online speech before voters went to the ballot box. It's unclear if this interference influenced election outcomes, but there was one case where it could have: Romania. And this relates to what is arguably the most alarming revelation in Part 2 of the report, and that's what happened during the 2024 election in Romania. And the report's summary sums it up like this, quote, "The first round of the 2024 Romanian presidential election took place on November 24, 2024. Independent populist candidate Călin Gorescu won an upset victory, advancing to a runoff against centrist candidate Elena Lasconi. However, in between the first and second rounds of voting, the Constitutional Court of Romania annulled the election after Romania's intelligence service alleged that Russia boosted Gorescu's campaign on social media. Subsequent public reporting has called this narrative into question, finding that another Romanian political party may have been behind the alleged Russian social media campaign. Nonetheless, the Romanian election authority barred Gorescu from running in the do-over election in May 2025. Close quote. Surprisingly, the result was that the pro-EU party won the do-over election, even though another anti-EU party had won the first round of the rerun election. And what's even more surprising is that documents disclosed by TikTok revealed that they had found no evidence of Russia promoting Gorescu during the 2024 election via the platform, and yet he was still blocked from running in the 2025 election. To add insult to injury, the EU went on to open an investigation into TikTok under the DSA, even after the social media platform had complied with everything they requested. And this might have something to do with the fact that by the end of 2024, reports had come out about how an opposition party was behind the TikTok campaign and wanted to use Gorescu to knock another political party out of the race. As you can imagine, this revelation went viral on social media, which presumably prompted the EU to crack the whip and tell the big tech platforms to shut it down or else. Believe it or not, though, it wasn't until December 2025 that the EU formally fined a social media platform for failing to comply with the DSA. And as you might have guessed, the platform was X, but you'll never guess the 3 reasons why. The first is X's blue check marks, which the EU alleges are deceptive. The second is a lack of transparency around X's advertising model. And the third is the inability to effectively scrape data from the platform. X has until sometime this month to address the blue checkmark concerns, and until sometime next month to address the other 2 concerns. Musk has vowed to fight things out very publicly in court, and this was something acknowledged by EU officials in a Q&A they did shortly after the fine was announced, and their replies were somewhat crazy. They seemed almost excited by the fine. They insisted that Europeans are free to say whatever they want online, and they even went as far as to imply that most takedowns of content on social media are being done voluntarily, not because of EU pressure. To their point, many private companies have, in fact, been proactive in online censorship, seemingly independent of external pressure. And this might have something to do with the fact that they're intertwined with the same institutions that sustain the current global world order. Discord's recent decision to voluntarily introduce age verification is evidence of this, and Discord isn't the only one doing it. And that reminds me, the timing of the EU's fine against X is alarming given the circumstances. To put things into perspective, the EU started investigating X under the DSA way back in December 2023, but they didn't formally announce a fine until December 2025. Perhaps it's just a coincidence, but Australia introduced age verification for social media just a few days later, becoming the first country to do so. In January this year, Malaysia became the second country to introduce age verification for social media, though it doesn't go into force until the second half of this year. Norway, Denmark, and France are among the other countries planning on rolling out age verification by the second half of 2026. The EU is reportedly planning on making age verification mandatory across the bloc, compatible with a digital ID. Put simply, you have half a dozen countries rolling out age verification to use social media while going after social media companies for refusing to comply with their online censorship laws. And in case it wasn't clear enough, this age verification will require some form of government-issued ID. And this will make it much easier for institutions to go after the most critical voices that oppose them, which is terrifying. And to think that this whole situation could have been avoided if these institutions just admitted they were wrong and mended their ways to rebuild their trust with the public. The fact that they're doubling down on surveillance and censorship suggests that the corruption in these institutions has become so entrenched that it's impossible for them to be reformed. And it looks like the EU is one of them. And it makes sense when you think about it. What causes corruption? A lack of accountability and the ability to stay in your position or move to another position after you've broken the rules. EU politicians seem to check that box, but don't take my word for it. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas reportedly called European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen a, quote, dictator, about whom nothing can be done. For what it's worth, Kallas has advice for you if you're upset about the state of the world right now. Start drinking. Yes, really. And this brings me to the big question that I'm sure many of you are asking. Why now? After all, attempts to censor speech online have been around since the internet started going mainstream in the 1990s. Why have many major countries only started introducing formal online censorship regulations over the last few years? And why are so many of them going into force starting in 2026? Why not 2025 or 2027? We reckon the answer relates to what we mentioned at the start of the video. The decline of trust in institutions globally, and mainly those related to Western countries. To refresh your memory, policies around the pandemic caused trust in institutions to decline, but it wasn't just health. Trust in institutions more broadly collapsed during the pandemic and has been falling rapidly ever since. To refresh your memory, policies around the pandemic caused trust in institutions related to health to decline. But it wasn't just health. Trust in institutions more broadly collapsed during the pandemic and has been falling rapidly ever since. It's probably not a coincidence then that the pandemic was when these online censorship laws started being tabled by politicians around the world. It just took a couple of years for them to go into force, which is expected since censoring social media platforms requires coordination and planning. As to why we're seeing age verification pushed out right now, it's probably because trust has reached an inflection point. This is evidenced by the fact that populist parties on the right and the left are growing in popularity around the world. What they have in common is a disdain for existing institutions and a desire to reform them or dismantle them if reform isn't possible, which, as we just discussed, could very well be the case. And this makes populism of any kind a threat to the current world order and something that must be stopped. There's just one small problem, and that's that you can't censor reality. People notice that crime in their neighborhood is going up. They notice when their wages aren't keeping up with inflation. And they notice when public and private institutions are coordinating to try and shut them up about what's really going on. And that's why these censorship efforts are likely to fail. But it doesn't mean that they won't be tried. We just hope that the timing of the age verification on social media in 2026 isn't a sign of some kind of upcoming crisis or exogenous shock. Never forget how eager institutions are to exercise control. And if you're in the EU, always remember that the EU has formally given itself the power to take control of online speech in such a situation and will shut it all down if they can't stop the truth from spreading. And if you want to know why Europe is collapsing, then be sure to watch our video on that right over here. And if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This is Nick, over and out.